Hello, Sage Seeds. We've got a special episode today. Special because ATVI, Activision Blizzard, is no longer a company. It was fully acquired by Microsoft for $69 billion. Plus or minus a couple pennies. Because this company is no longer actively traded, I feel like I want to go a lot deeper into the explanation of what the HSeeds AI is doing behind the scenes. I largely stay away from revealing too much for many reasons. Obviously, I worked hard to build this AI, but also just because I don't want people to take one detail and blow it off. I want to make sure that people understand that this channel is about developing an intuition for value stories. In this episode, I will reveal more details than I basically ever will. Again. And I like that because the stock's no longer available for on any of us. How good of a deal was this for Microsoft, the company that acquired Activision Blizzard? And we know how much they're paying. Let's dive in so that your wisdom can blossom. The items 8. Consolidated balance sheet for Activision Blizzard. An assets to liabilities of over 3, very much playing it defensively, doesn't seem to want to grow at all, really, based on just this decision. Extra defensive when you consider that about 1/3 of all their assets is in goodwill alone, and so companies that they have acquired in the past. Fun fact to note is Microsoft is picking up an extra $13 billion in retained earnings through this acquisition. That's going to largely end up as goodwill on Microsoft's balance sheet, plus the goodwill that they're picking up here. I mean, Microsoft's adding a good $20 billion in goodwill. Well, they can handle it. Moving on to the income statement. Once you take into account the recurring subscription revenue that Activision gets, it's declining sales in a much less scary way. Overall, this is what earnings per share has been doing. Some teetering because of that subscription revenue. The statement of cash flows seems to be that they've been winding down software development projects. Now, we could look into specifically what they mean by this in their accounting. These decreases show a decrease in the amount of resources put into ongoing software development, decreasing over the last 3 years how many games they're working on. Okay, so let's just get right into approaching the rest of this. Microsoft paid $69 billion. Microsoft's not just buying the shares of this company, they're going to be acquiring what's called the enterprise value. So let's check out back in that balance sheet how much debt Microsoft is picking up. All their debt is considered long-term, and it is $3.6 billion roughly. And so Microsoft paying $69 billion minus these 3.6, they're actually paying $65.5 billion for the shares, which, as of when I made this video, we're trading it for $73 billion. So the market overshooting by almost $8 billion there. Nothing to scoff at. That's a lot of people getting excited for something. Not doing basic arithmetic, which sometimes happens for sure. We are going to look at explanations of the goodwill and possibly even what they mean by a current asset called software development. Together, they represent about 40% of all assets. We have a section for goodwill. Most of the acquisitions were completed over 3 years ago. Looking into the latest acquisitions might give us some idea of generally how this works. AI features for all King's games, not about new product sales necessarily, but about fortifying product sales. It's tying in immediately to software development, so let's try to find more information about that. They do have a note for software development. Microsoft is buying about $1.3 billion in ongoing costs for new video games. That is much smaller than $69 billion total purchase price. We could probably figure it out. Calculation exactly. About 1.88%. If we just ignore synergy, a year from now, when Activision Blizzard is fully integrated into Microsoft's income statements, the increase in Microsoft's balance sheet is going to be about 2% of what they spent. Going back to the income statement, we can get a rough idea of what the cost of revenues for product sales looks like for Activision in the last couple of years. That could give us some idea of about how much Microsoft might be expecting to sell in video games that it would not have sold at all without this acquisition. Here's product sales, here's product cost right here. Dividing this number by this number to get the margin here, it's gonna be about 30, probably like 31%. Now we're gonna flip that on its head. We now know that the cost of future releases is roughly being stated in the balance sheet as 1.3 billion. That 1.3 billion, if it does exactly the same as the average has over the last year, will be 31% of future sales that Microsoft will maybe hope to get from this new pipeline. 1,300 million divided by 31%. The top line of that is going to be about 4.2 billion in future sales. Hey, if you're getting more comfortable uncovering the stories behind the numbers, please like and subscribe. Just in terms of pipeline that Microsoft is acquiring, they might be expecting that they've just acquired about 4.2 billion in future product sales, games that aren't released yet. And of course, they're going to buy the teams that created that pipeline, a handful of extra billion in video game sales every year. And they paid 69 billion for this without even considering the annual subscription revenue. In a world where Microsoft has just picked up billions and billions dollars worth of video game pipeline for Xbox, we know for a fact some exclusives are coming from that pipeline. Some of them are mobile games, and so does Microsoft start to make a reach for people's mobile time now too? They certainly tried a couple years ago and that failed. How do we think about, was it a good deal? Please like and subscribe. The Sage Seeds AI is going to give its opinion now about current market prices, which remember would have been about 8 billion more than what Microsoft is going to be paying in just a week from now. Again, why are markets like this? I don't know. We'll look at what the Sage Seeds AI says, and then we'll kind of readjust that. I've actually done a special one-time analysis in order to try to change the input data and make the AI think that the current price is what Microsoft is paying exactly. I'm curious if anyone sees other video game companies that might get scooped up by big players. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of successful studios start to really kind of pick a side in the console wars, increasingly so. I think we all see it coming. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Sage Seeds AI would rank Activision Blizzard as 187 out of 271 in value for the 2022 season, with the price that the market is assigning this company days before a publicly disclosed acquisition. If we adjust this in behind the scenes, which I definitely did off camera, the new ranking would have been around 140-ish. And so what's going on here? Why is Activision in the middle of the rankings at the price that Microsoft is acquiring? Every time there's a ranking, the AI is looking at the prices for all 271 companies as of when the ranking is being generated. Microsoft, honestly, good on them that they got a price that, when the AI looks around at this hundreds of companies, looks pretty average. Nothing to be ashamed about that they're paying a middling ranking price. A lot of times, in order to acquire a competitor, you kind of have to overpay a little bit, and that's where we get things like goodwill. Why would a competitor sell for a quote-unquote fair price when they're literally competing with you? But what's going on behind the scenes, I'm going to focus on the parts of the AI that really take into account price. I've said multiple times that that's part of the analysis, but I've also said multiple times that it is by far not the major point. It's a component, and hopefully it gives people some intuition, further intuition, seeing that paying 8 billion less compared to current prices would change this from a 187 to a 140. It would make the ranking climb up by about 40, almost 50 spots. That's definitely a big difference. We're looking at about a 10% better price, which might not be as much as the 8 billion makes it sound, right? So if I just pay 10% less for Activision, the ranking is increasing by almost 50 spots. How does that make sense? The way it makes sense is because businesses are a bit like sponges. At its core, when it's time to make a ranking, the AI is taking in all these different input feeds and modeling it like a sponge that is going to get squeezed a little bit every single year, and every time you squeeze, that sponge puts off a certain amount of cash. Obviously, some sponges that we have are higher quality. When you squeeze them, they take out lots and lots of suds, lots and lots of bubbles, even if there's just a little bit of soap. Some sponges last longer than other sponges, meaning that if you put in soap this year, some sponges might last, okay, maybe I shouldn't say years, but if you put in soap today, some sponges will give you suds for days and days and days. Other sponges will be requiring you to put in more soap on that sponge by the time you're even finished with the first wash or whatever it is. Companies are the same. You put in cash and they will spin off cash. Some businesses will require you to continue to put in cash in order to continue to see soap, to continue to see excess cash returned. But there are some businesses that are so high quality that you put in a little bit of capital today and they spin off excess capital for years and years, sometimes even decades. That's fundamentally why this is a value investment algorithm and a value investment AI. Not every investor approaches businesses like this, but value investors do, and Sage Seeds AI does. How does the price play into this? Well, the Sage Seeds AI assumes that every time you buy a share, even if it's in a secondary market, let's assume that that's you putting soap on the sponge. Even if it's one share, even if it's a fractional share, even if it's just $1 you put in, that's a little bit of soap on the sponge. Well, the AI is trying to model this to figure out how much that dollar is going to be used. Some investors like Warren Buffett and disciples of Warren Buffett have referred to this as the dollar test. What is $1 today at the current price going to be used for? What does this sponge do if I put a little bit of soap right now? In the 2022 season, Activision has reported to us what they did with the dollars. Sage Seeds AI is able to model it, I would claim very accurately, but of course I'm biased, but it models what would have happened if you put soap on this business sponge in 2022, and then ranks that compared to all the other options that the AI is able to peer into because of what I'm doing in the background, which I promise I'm trying to go as fast as I can, guys. If a share costs 10% less, then you had to put 10% less soap on that sponge in order to get the same sales, the same gross profit, eventually the same net income. All of that stays the same because 2022 already happened. How much soap you're being asked to put on the sponge. And that's what the Sage Seeds AI looks at the price as. You just put on less soap to get more bubbles. That's how, by paying around 10% less than this ranking is considering, Microsoft is able to get a Sage Seeds AI ranking that is almost 50 positions above the current price. It's not as simple as cheaper is better. Most of the calculation is looking at the characteristics of the sponge. Hopefully that gives people some further ways to think about how to unlock your intuition, unlock your wisdom. Having this mental model in your head, even if you're not looking at all the data points all the time, will hopefully guide you towards understanding if there's value or not. I'm basically indoctrinating y'all into being value investors, one video at a time. Share your wisdom, share this video.